Thank you for being here once again. Thank you. So much of what we know and what we explore is unknown to our conscious mind. On an unconscious level, you could say that we're all connected because we share a sort of consciousness that is ancient and that has come from all experience of not just your personal experience, but the experience of all humanity, is encoded in our genetics and in our neurology, in our neurological systems. And so I like to share some stories with you. We will share some stories with you today. And how you get the most value out of those will be in a felt sense, using what we call your felt sense. So allow yourself to relax and just get in, feel the story and map these lessons onto your own life. When he was 10 years old, he came home crying with a black eye and a bloody lip. 5 boys had ganged up and ambushed him at the baseball practice. And as his father cleaned his cuts and bandaged him, he asked, "Why are you crying?" The boy thought for a moment. He said, "I thought he was my friend. I thought they were all my friends." He muttered something about his pride being hurt and his trust being crushed. The boy's heart was broken. His father was kind of a cross between Clint Eastwood and Gregory Peck, one of those tougher men that had a gentleman's side. But what was very valuable to him was honor. And the father told the boy, what they did was dishonorable. And you can either go back over there and teach them how to fight fair, how to be honorable, or you could lower your eyes every time you see them. His father knew that once a young boy takes the path of being a coward, it's very hard to leave that path. His father was a golden gloved boxer in the Army, and he had taught the boy discipline and pride and self-respect by teaching him to box since he was 7 years old. He insisted on sportsmanship, and he had no patience with a dirty fighter. And he had told the boy, "Don't you ever start a fight. But if you get in trouble, you need to know how to finish one. This is something that needs to be finished." The boy knew his father was right. He played baseball with these boys, and he saw them at school every day. He saw them in the locker room. But he looked up at his dad and he said, "Dad, I just got the crap beat out of me. Do you really want me to go teach them a lesson?" The father kept wrapping the bandages, and when he had wrapped the last one, he said, "You can do whatever you want, but I know what I'd do." Well, you should have seen the boys' faces when the father and the son walked back onto the baseball field. The father stayed by the car and watched and waited as the boy went out onto the pitcher's mound and one by one called each boy out to have a fair fight. And one by one, they hit the ground. When they went down, he would offer them a hand and say, "Had enough?" If they said no, they went another round. If they said yes, he let them go. When it came to the last boy, some fathers had gathered around at the baseball practice, and some of them had confronted the boy's father, asking him, "What's going on here? What's happening here? Why is your boy and my boy fighting? We have to stop this." The father explained to them what had happened. And so one by one, the fathers lined up shoulder to shoulder with the boy's father and watched the proceedings. When the last boy came, he was afraid. He didn't want to go out there. He said, begging his father, "Don't make me go." And his father said, "Son, you can go out and take a beating from him, or you can come home and take a beating from me, but either way, you got one coming." When the last round of fighting was over, the boy walked back to the car, and not a word was said. It didn't matter whether he had won or lost. A rite of passage had taken place. He had understood. He didn't understand at that time. He felt a mixture of humility and pride. He had faced his fears in the presence of honorable men. And though he was just a boy, he had earned their respect. And in doing so, he earned his own. He was able to hold his head high when he returned to baseball practice after that. He learned that it's not the victories that make us who we are. It's the challenges that we face and overcome that shape our hearts and forge our souls with the ability to be ruthless when we need to be and compassionate when we can.
I think this would be a good opportunity to perhaps ask you if you've ever had a situation in your own life or your children's lives when you were being tested, when you had the dilemma of what's the right thing to do here? What's the honorable thing to do here? What's the courageous thing to do here? Maybe you've had children that came home from school, or maybe you were that child who came from school and you needed the help of your parents to know what was the thing to do. What would you do in that situation? If you're the parent to that child, would you tell your child, go out there and fight your fight? Or would you tell them to back down and not fight? The questions are more interesting than just the answers. It's something to think about. How many parents do we have here in the audience? Wow, okay. And if you're not a parent, you've been a child, yes? We've all been there, right? So we know what it's like to go to school and be challenged by our classmates, or go to work, or be in a relationship.
Anyone ever face an overwhelming situation when the odds were completely against you? Yes. Yeah. And have you had to summon some part of yourself that you previously did not know was there? Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many of you have ever had to face something like that alone? Yes, right. With no support from anyone. Mm-hmm. And how many of you had the support of an older, wiser,
parental-like figure or
that supported you?
Right. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many of you have ever been encouraged to back down from a situation? Maybe that was the right thing to do at the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how did that leave you feeling? How did that, did that leave you feeling proud or ashamed? Did that shape the way that you addressed issues in the future? Mm-hmm. So these questions are not so much questions that have a right answer. Mm-hmm. The answer is whatever you say your answer is, but it's a way of looking at your life, a way of looking at how has my life been shaped? How do I deal with the situations in my life? What does the future look like to me? The unpredictable, overwhelming sometimes, obstacle-filled future. You know, how will I face that? Will I face it even though I'm afraid? Mm-hmm. You know, like a warrior, will I step up to it? In the story, the boy stepped up to the pitcher's mound, right in the center of the field, and said, "Come on out here."
So let's consider something. Yeah. Imagine this boy goes home, as many children do, as most of us have, and you tell your parents, "I got beat up today in school by my friends." How many of you, your parents would say, "What did you do that they beat you up?" How many of you had that experience, that they would ask you, "What did you do?" Right? First thing they ask, "What did you do?" Right? How many of you, your parents, or if you were the parent, said to the boy, "You're going to go back there and you're going to put up a fight"? How many of you have had parents that said that? And right? How many of you yourself, without anyone telling you, you would go put up a fight? Right? There's a few people here, they just go right back, you know, yeah. I'm not, right? How many of you would take the peaceful way and try not to confront them and try to avoid them for the rest of your life, perhaps, right? And how many of you would go and have a talk with them and see if you could resolve the situation, right? Certainly more women would raise their hand, yes? Yeah. Let's work it out peacefully, the feminine way, right? And so can you see that all of those possibilities exist? And was there a possibility that I did not say? Right? Now there is one option I didn't say. There's an option that I didn't say, perhaps because it's one we don't want to admit. But there's a possibility of being a victim of the situation. In other words, being somebody who, from that moment on, considers themselves a punching bag. Why did this happen to me? And then always in life, when situations happen, they go back to that baseball field and ask themselves, why did that happen to me? And keep taking the beatings and feel sad or upset or victimized, but never be willing to find a solution. And so that is another way that human beings deal with situations, even though it's not one that we readily admit to. Now, how many of you have been in that situation or know people who have? Yes? Certainly as children, sometimes we go that route until we wake up and go, no more, I'm not doing that anymore. I don't want to be a victim.
And let's be clear, we're not, we're not encouraging violence or encouraging, that your kids get in fight or that you get in fights. And the beatings that we're talking about are metaphorical in the sense that, sometimes you take a verbal abuse or sometimes you take social abuse. How many of you have ever been the victim of what I call social rape? Mm-hmm. Where publicly somebody sets out to embarrass you, to hurt your feelings, or to reveal something about you that you had asked them to hold in private, and publicly humiliate you. How many have ever been
at work,
you know,
or in
a victim
school,
of
right?
public humiliation or gossip, where you know that people are talking behind your back and saying things that might demean you or undermine you or make you seem smaller in other people's eyes? That now when you go to meet those coworkers or those people or in your social group or your cultural group, your family, they all have like a lesser opinion of you because of what they've been participating in, a sort of behind your back sort of gossip. How many have ever, if you're in this community, I promise you,
any human community.
Yeah, any community, you've had that one happen at some point or another, because people bond together over gossip, don't they? People like to get together and talk down, you know. So in that way, they've got some agreement going with themselves, and so they've bonded with someone outside of your circle, with you outside of the circle.
So, as human beings, we've been where the little boy has been. In one way or another, we've had the experience of having to choose how to deal with a situation where there's a challenge. Now, how many of the parents here, if you had a child coming home, would you choose what this father chose to do? How many of you would say, you're going to go back up there and you're going to stand up for yourself? Not necessarily in, you know, the same way, but in one way or another, you're going to go defend your honor. How many of you as parents? Yeah, because you want your child to learn how to stand up for themselves and not to back down, yes? Wouldn't that be the reason you would do it? Have any of the parents been in that situation? Have you actually had to tell your kids, you know, I want you to go back out there and you're going to defend yourself, or you're going to stand up for yourself? And did it go well? Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't, right?
Sometimes it doesn't turn out, right?
Sometimes it doesn't turn out. Your kid goes out there and they get whipped again, and
yeah, that boy could have gone and gotten his nose punched or something, right?
I shouldn't have listened to you, right? So look what happened now. It's worse, Mom or Dad. Yes? So as parents, we take chances as well, telling our children to go out there and defend themselves. It doesn't always turn out like it did in this story. But let's take the example of a child who, let's look at the scenario in a way that, what do you think would happen to a child that went to school, came home, didn't tell the parents, and went back to school the next day? What do you think is the foreseeable outcome? The next day, what would happen to this child? He goes back to school. He took the beating, came home, didn't say anything, and went back to school. What do you think would happen? What are some possible outcomes?
What would be some outcomes? And that's okay, you can...
Just yell it out.
You'll get recorded. Just speak it out.
Scared, right?
You'd be scared?
Terrified going back to school.
Yeah.
Scared and terrified going back to school because it could happen again, right? So now they have found somebody they can bully, yes, which is what we get in school these days, right? And we have instances of children even committing suicide.
Yeah, and aside from him being scared, how do you think the other boys would react?
Right, they're ashamed.
Or the other kids, right? How would they be in that situation if the boy just went back to school the next day and was afraid of them? What do you think would happen?
Yeah, they would bug him again,
yeah,
because we have to justify what we did. So we have to do it again so that we're justified in doing it. He had it coming, right? So when you become somebody who absorbs that kind of behavior, the behavior continues, right? Is there a possibility that the kids would feel really bad and say, wow, what we did yesterday was wrong, let's not do that again? Is that possible? Possible, but unlikely, yes? Unlikely. Children, or even human beings, tend to repeat that kind of behavior again so as to justify it. Because now that you've done it once, the second time you have to prove that this person deserved it.
And I don't want to exclude from the conversation the possibility of actually resolving situations with an overwhelming unconditional love, what we call agape love. But I only know of 2 instances where that even exists, and that is between you and God, and your mom and you, right? Those are about the only 2 cases where I believe that you can pretty much count on unconditional love carrying the day.
Right, you can pretty much do anything to your mom
carry the
and
day.
she still loves you.
You know,
Yes,
little boys going back to school, or you going back to work, or you confronting the people in your lives that may have gossiped or undermined you in some way, or somebody who may have attacked you even legally in some way. To overwhelm them with unconditional love and get the situation resolved is highly unlikely.
Especially at this age.
You know, I wish we could count on that.
Although there are children.
In my highest desire, we would be able to count on that.
Absolutely, and there are children, and there are cases where the kid goes back to school the next day, goes up to these kids and hugs them, and tells them, "I'm sorry we had a fight yesterday. Let's be friends again." Unusual, but like it's happened, right? Very, very unusual cases. So it isn't like it happens every day, but like Gregory said, it could happen, yes?
So I just didn't want to exclude that possibility from the conversation because,
Right.
you know, there are situations where, you know, sometimes that's all you got.
Now let's just take the scenario further. The kid who grows up having put up a fight, what's the likely outcome of that scenario? You have a kid, he gained his honor, he has his own self-respect, he has the self-respect of the men of the community, yes? And he also has the respect of his peers, because now everybody knows what happened, yes? Now, what do you think is the future of that little boy?
Be a leader,
Become a leader, yes? A likely possibility. What are some of the other possibilities for a little boy like that?
Go ahead.
What is it?
run for president.
Run for
He can
president.
run for president, yeah.
Right, leadership,
He
yes?
can have leadership.
Yeah, we can see the beginnings of a leadership in him,
I'd really
yes?
like to hear from some of the moms. What do they
Yes.
think? Because my mom was so against
Against
me
that kind of thing, right?
getting in fights that it was like you weren't supposed to tell her about that.
Right.
He'll probably welcome challenging jobs.
He'll welcome challenging jobs,
Jobs,
right?
yeah.
Not back down from challenges. Yes. What else? What would be the possibility for his future?
More confidence.
More
Yes,
confidence.
more
Yes.
confidence, yes.
Definitely, right?
Yes.
Also teach his child the same.
Perhaps teach his child the same. Yeah.
Yes.
It would continue that,
Yeah.
that strain of honor. Yes, please.
Faces any challenge.
Faces any challenges.
Faces any
right?
challenges, even though it's unreasonable, yes?
Right.
Because what this boy in the story did was not reasonable. His father's request was not a reasonable request. The little boy looked up at his father and says, "Wait, I just got beat up by 5 guys and you want me to go teach them a lesson?"
Right.
This is totally unreasonable, right? Shocking to the reasonable mind. And it points at something that one of the lessons in the story, if you will, is people tend to sort out their reality, sort out their relationships, their circumstances in life, what's familiar to them, the challenges, we'll say, in one or two ways, one of two ways. There's what we call reasonable thinkers, yes? Well, that's just not reasonable, right? So when we approach by reasonable thinking, we automatically, and unknowing to ourselves, sort out, immediately filter all possibilities that are not reasonable. So a reasonable point of view will immediately select for you, in spite of any other intentions, it will select for you what you see and you don't see. It will select for you what you hear and don't hear. It will select for you what you feel and what you don't feel. So that, can you see how that would then shape your actions in life? Therefore, the results that you produce in life, in other words, it would shape your life, right? Your life would be shaped by the filters that you see the challenges through. So a reasonable filter will give you that. A person who, the other kind of thinking is sorting for possibility. So when faced with challenges, possibility thinkers, thank you, possibility thinkers immediately think, what's possible here? What are all the different ways I can make this work? You know, what are all the things that work and don't work, and how do I know they work? Maybe they don't. Maybe nobody ever tried this. Let's try that. So a possibility thinker is constantly going into unknown territory, open to possibility. And that will select for them, this thinking will select for them, some of the things may be reasonable, some not, right? Because it's not looking for reasonable, it's looking for what's possible. So it will select what you see and don't see. Can you see? You would see more stuff now. What you hear and don't hear, who you meet and who you don't meet, what you feel and don't feel. So this, just the frame of mind of what's possible here. What's possible, you know? You know, it's actually possible that I could meet this challenge, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. You know, how is a reason question, right? What's possible is a possible question. I'll just do it, I don't know how. Kind of like we're doing this TV show, right?
And clearly we don't know how. Yes.
Right? We say, well, what if we got a bunch of people and we got some cameras and we got, I don't know, we'll need a table and I'll bring my laptop and we will create.
And Mr. Arabai is a possibility thinker.
He's totally
I
a
must tell
possibility
you,
guy.
Because we got them into this really big production and they all said yes. And it was all about a possibility, you know, because as most of you know, we don't have audience shows on Iranian television. And we certainly don't have them in English. Yes? So this is completely out of the box.
Well,
this is totally in the realm of what's possible as opposed to what's reasonable.
And
right?
I want to say that I want to acknowledge Mr. Arabai because it was about 8 years ago that I walked into his office. I had been a guest on Azita's show, and everything I said was translated into Farsi, and everything that people asked me was translated back into English. So it was very time-consuming and a little cumbersome. It made the show go very slow, and for bilingual people that would be boring, right? Because they understand it twice. And so I walked into Mr. Atabai's office and said, you should give me a show in English on the Persian TV channels.
Right?
Right? And
Totally possible.
he's like, why would I do that? Because it would be the only one, and you are like you're a guy that always does things first, tries things before everybody else does. That's the kind of guy you are. I just reminded him of who he already is, and he said, we'll give it a try, but you have to do it with Azita first. Mm-hmm. So we did, and so I've been on television consistently for like 7 or 8 years now. I'm on going on my 8th year on television, and he was the source of that, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Right? Now, how many of you, when it comes to life, you have to sit down and look at the 2 columns, the reasons that are good to do something and the reasons that you shouldn't do something? How many of you have the columns, the reason columns, right?
That's the reason.
Very wise.
Yeah.
Very
good.
wise.
You should have
now,
that.
how many of you have the reason columns and then you have what's possible, right? Exactly. And then you make a choice. Because you can always go with your reasons, and here's what happens to your reasons. As soon as you convince yourself with all the good reasons to do something, and then you do it, what's the thing that happens next? Well,
what was that?
good things
Yes.
happen, but then sometimes not. Sometimes all the reasons why you shouldn't have done it come up, and then you go, I shouldn't have done that, right? So if you go with reason, you will always be undecided. You can't commit to anything.
Anybody ever buy a house, a car, or get a new apartment or take a new job or something, like you got rid of something and got a new thing, and then immediately going, oh, this is not a good idea.
This is a bad idea.
Buyer's remorse.
Right?
Anybody had buyer's remorse?
Like a new car that breaks down?
Like
right?
you were like so excited to do this, and then it was like you were totally impossibility, like, oh, this is going to be so great, and you gave yourself all these great reasons why it should be, it should work, and some of them might even not have been good reasons, like, you know, I don't know, it has the right color paint or something, right?
Yeah.
But you convinced yourself it was the right thing to do, and as soon as you did it, you had buyer's remorse.
Right.
We've all had that?
Yeah. So reasons will only get you so far. The thing that will ever get you over the hill is to commit to what's possible. Now, this boy, if there were reasons, he had very good reasons not to go back out there. And the good reason is, I got beat up once, I don't need to go do this again. So that was a good reason. And many of the parents, including Gregory's mom, would have said, absolutely not, over my dead body, you're not going out there to have a fight, it's not the right thing to do, I don't want to encourage my child to pick fights, yes, or to be involved in violence, yes, especially these days, we're very anti-violent, right? Violence. So there were a lot of reasons not to. And yet you have a father who is looking at the possibility of honor, looking at the possibility of self-respect, looking at the possibility that if his kid backs down from here, he's gonna go home and feel what about himself? If this kid, what's the other scenario? The kid goes home and his parents say, you know, we're gonna change your school, or you know, just go to school and ignore these kids, or some other scenario. But he doesn't.
I'm going to call the principal.
I'm going to call the principal, right? The parents put up the fight, right? So, what do you think?
All of those are valid, reasonable things to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, what would be this kid's future now? What's the future of a kid who doesn't put up a fight? Powerless and weak feeling. Yes, certainly one. Yes. What else?
Like a victim all the time.
Like a victim all the time. What else? What else is possible?
Problems that we just run away.
There's problems, he runs away, yes? Hasn't learned how to face up to problems. Can you see that, right? Possibility.
Always waiting for a higher authority, somebody with more authority to take care of it. Mm-hmm. I'm not big enough, strong enough, smart enough, old enough, mature enough, rich enough, educated enough, in shape enough, pretty enough, smart enough. I'll get somebody else to deal with it. Somebody who's all those things more than me, I'll get them to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Yes? Mm-hmm. So that can become a mode of operation, and many people are in this mode of operation. I got a big problem, I get a lawyer. I got a big, or I get a something. Mm-hmm. I get somebody other than me, anybody but me, right, to handle it. And so I believe that we have begun to become a nation, if not a entire world culture of wimps. People who are always waiting for somebody else to take care of it, waiting for the government to take care of it, mm-hmm. waiting for the police to take care of it, waiting for somebody else to take care of it. And I believe that all change,
But we marry people also who take care of it,
mm-hmm.
right? Don't we marry people?
Who will take care of it?
We marry them for that specific reason. This is somebody who's going to take care of it. Like men marry that woman who's like, you know, the one who puts up the fight. You know, the fighter one, the one who goes out there, the one who makes the money, the one who takes care of the kids, the one who's the super responsible, exhausted woman, right? And then the women marry the super responsible guy who takes care of everything, right? Who is the workaholic, who's working, you know, 16-hour days and also taking care of the kids and doing all of that, right? So somebody else will take care of the problems. You know, I know women who don't even know what the IRS stands for, right? They don't. Some of you are looking at me like, what is it? Right? The Internal Revenue Service, you know, where you pay taxes. Some women have never filed taxes. They don't even know what that would
I
be.
asked a woman once what bank she banked at. She said, Ready Teller.
Right?
I'm like, no, but what's the bank?
Right.
When she's
ATM.
looking in her mind at it says Ready Teller.
Right? So if you don't be responsible for your life. So Gregory, would you like for us to tell you how this boy turned out? Would you like to know how he turned out? Like really how he turned out? Yes? All of you? Yeah, would you like to know how he turned out? Okay, great. So Gregory, how did this boy turn out since you wrote the story?
Well, today he touches millions of people's lives that he never met.
So he became a leader.
Yeah. Through television and YouTube and Facebook and private sessions. And he teaches workshops that are all about teaching men about honor and integrity. And he married a beautiful woman that takes care of everything.
Right.
And won't let him. So yeah, that's we've seen, you know, the cost to families and societies and cultures when particularly when men do not step up to the plate. When men do not live by their own personal code of ethics, their own personal code of honor. Whenever, you know, I don't teach men honor and integrity, I just help them find their own. Because you men, you come with that. That's something that's in your heart and in your soul. And
We just bring it out.
We don't live in a society that is pulling for that, like lifting men to their highest. We're mostly boys today in the last few generations have been raised by their peers. You know, either by a mother without a father, sometimes with a father that's too busy to be a father, so he's just kind of there as a provider. And so the young men grow up being raised by their peers and by their heroes, their football heroes, their movie heroes. You know, I don't know about you, I was raised by Clint Eastwood, Sylvester Stallone, and John Wayne and Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? They were the models, if you will, after my dear father who taught me to box when I was 7.
So this is the little boy, for those of you who haven't
Yeah.
figured out, this is a story from Gregory's life, where his father sent him back to go face the boys and get his honor.
And you know, every day I realized, in speaking with the men that have graduated from my courses and some of the men that have known me for years, they say, you know, I hardly ever have a conversation with you in which something doesn't allude to, or the conversation comes around to, what's honorable, what's the right thing to do, what has integrity. And you know, in my world, it's just something I'm still working on. You know, I don't think you ever arrive at a place where you're like totally in integrity and you have the ultimate honor. I don't believe, I mean, that would be like trying to clean your house so perfectly you never had to clean it again, right? There's always more. There's always something to do, and sometimes you fall out of it, and sometimes you have to get back up. And I believe that what's honorable is not to try to constantly maintain a state of honor, but to notice when you're out of step with yourself, when you've violated your own personal values, and to get back to that, to just come back to that, and to have the courage to get back to that, instead of waiting for somebody else to do it or to remind you or to point it out, to actually step back into that yourself, because that's what feels right. It becomes a habitual way of being, because that's just what feels right.
There's also something I want to share with you. I had the pleasure and really the distinct honor for me as a woman to be to lead a part of the men's workshop that Gregory leads to men. And I had fought a long, hard battle to be allowed into an exclusively men's workshop, yes? And so I was allowed to lead a part of it this last time that we had the workshop in LA. And the experience of being with a group of men who had come from all over the world.
7 different
I mean,
countries.
as far away as Australia and France and England and Germany and Norway, to be in this workshop and to be in the presence of these men, some married, some very young, some in their 20s, one 18, some much older in their 60s, as they grappled with their own honor, as they grappled with their own integrity, as they grappled with their own lives, looking at what had happened in their lives and where honor was lost to restore it. And the sense of power and respect and completeness and fullness that comes with that as being a man. And the results that we've seen since the men have graduated in their lives, in their relationships, in their families, in their health, in their finances,
Well, because
has been really something extraordinary.
Because like the two ways of thinking, reasonable and possible, how you view the world, in other words, the context or the lens that you view the world through, will determine what you see and don't see, and what you feel and don't feel, and what you hear and don't hear. And so life viewed through the lens or through the context, if you will. Does everybody, are you with me when I say context? Because I see your face go a little bit like that. What's context, right? The context is an overriding pattern of thinking or thought that through which you see something. So for example, if we were all restaurateurs, yes, we might have a discussion about food, but it would be in the context of how it's best served, how best for our clients, and so forth like that. That would be a different context than if we were just out to dinner together and we were surgeons talking about food, yes? So it's a different context when you talk about food with people who prepare food for a living, so to speak. So a different context. So when you view the world through a certain context, the context of honor and integrity, you see a different world. The world looks differently. You know, for the most part, we inherit the context of the day, and sometimes it changes from day to day, but for the most part, we inherit the way of seeing life, the conditioned way of thinking and seeing life that we got from our parents. Or that we got from our school, or that we got from our society or culture. And so we see things a certain way because I'm a man, or I'm a woman, or I'm black or white or Persian.
Or you look at things with, does it have honor or doesn't it have honor?
I have green glasses, or you know, we see things a certain way through a certain lens given what we've inherited, and so we never question it. We never question, is that the right way to see things, or is that not? And so the context or the conversation of honor and integrity, have you noticed it's kind of filtered away in our society? I mean, do you really see people like pulling for that, other than, you know, maybe the Marines who are using it as a way to get guys to enlist, right? Men of honor. Right? They'll put men of honor.
Defending your country,
yeah,
or defending...
the honorable thing to do and stuff like that. So they'll use honor almost like a sales pitch. Right?
We're not doing that.
That's not what we're talking about necessarily, right?
We're talking about a way of living that would enliven people.
And it particularly enlivens men. It is the access, gentlemen and ladies, it is the access to masculine freedom is honor and integrity. When men feel the most free, I'm not talking about that liberated thing we feel when we cheat and do all the bad stuff that men like to do. That feels good for a while, but it does not lead to freedom, and it doesn't lead to personal power, does it?
Right. It'll get you something
Yeah,
for the moment.
it'll get you something. It's gratification. But I'm talking about the actual freedom and power that men can experience when they know that whatever comes up, I'm going to deal with this in the most honorable way possible just because that's who I am. And that other stuff, I don't know. I just don't do that anymore. It's not who I am anymore. I don't have to worry about it. You know, I used to have to worry about myself. I used to have to worry about myself whether I would do the right thing or not. You know, if a beautiful enough woman came along, or somebody offered me enough money, would I cross over the line? Would I compromise? You know, at what point would I sell out? And I actually had some personal self-doubts about that I struggled with for years. You know, like how many millions is your sell-out point? Would you really sell out? You know, you know, at some point you might go, okay, this is too much money to turn down. Forget about my honor. Let's do this, right? I'll buy some honor later, right? So people do have a sellout point, and I'm, you know, I can say that I'm secure in myself in knowing that, you know, it's something that if you practice it, it becomes a habitual way of being, and then you begin to see the world through that, and then any other way just feels uncomfortable or weird.
Right.
You know, it's like if somebody asks you to wear a funny hat or put on your jacket backwards and wear it like that, it just doesn't feel right. You know, it just doesn't feel right. It's like, no, that doesn't fit.
So to wrap up this conversation, there are lessons that was important for this little boy to get. One lesson was the one that his father wanted to teach him, which was make up your own mind, do what's honorable for you, and then stick with it. You know, and his father told him, whatever you choose is fine with me. You're the one who's going to have to live with that. I know what I would do. Yes? So there's the lesson of how do we parent our children. Yes? There's also the lesson of how do I parent myself? How do I choose what is the right thing for me to do? Where do I start to look in my choices when I have choices to make? But I also think there's also another important lesson to learn. How many times in life do we go back to what our parents have told us and see a certain wisdom in what they said at the time? Yes? And don't we sometimes wish we had listened to them? In retrospect, yes? There are so many times we look back and go, wow, you know, they really had a certain wisdom. They knew something, yes? And so we wanted this to be a multi-layered experience and not just one lesson to take away from the story of the boy who goes and puts up a fight, yes? And then also, the choices that we've made in life, and we still make, have a future impact. And how many choices do you have today in which you would now think, I'm going to make the honorable choice, or I'm going to make a choice that I can live with and respect myself in the future. And go back to the little boy and his story and what he did, even though it was the harder choice to make. Yes? Do you want to add anything to that? And I also want to honor the fathers. How many fathers do we have in the room? Yes? Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here.
I want to make sure to honor the fathers.
Yes.
And your father as well.
Yeah. I want you to know that I do what I do to honor you and to honor your sons. I do this for you and for your children and for your grandchildren. This is who we really are interested in. We say that Embrace Growth is about living a legacy of love for future generations. We're not talking about leaving a legacy. That will be done once we've lived it. And so really we invite you to live your legacy. Be the legacy that your grandkids will talk about. You know, what will your children say about their grandpa, their grandma, you know? What is the legacy that you could live today that would inspire and create a context of freedom and power and personal self-respect into the future generations, such that your children and their children live in a world where love, dignity, self-respect, that's just how it is. That's just how it is. Around me, around them, there will be dignity, there will be self-respect, and I personally will see to it. I'm not going to wait for anybody else to give me the authorization to self-author your own life, to write your own story, in other words, to be self-authorizing. I don't need anyone to authorize me, I authorize me, based on my own credibility and my own experience. I give myself permission to bring honor, integrity, and dignity to the proceedings. What proceedings? Any proceedings, wherever I go. So I invite you to take that on.
And those of you who would like some information about the workshop, certainly feel free to talk to Shada, who you probably met as you came in the door. She's a tall woman with long dark hair, very...
you can't miss Shada.
You cannot miss Shada.
She runs our workshops.
She really has a presence.
Yeah.
So please feel free to ask her about any of our workshops and anything we've said here. Our staff here would be happy to help you. And I think this would be a really great time to take a lunch break, actually.
Yes.
I think we should, how many of you,
We've
if we
ordered
had a
lunch for
break
everyone.
now, that would be great, because we have lunch here.
Yeah.
And so we'd like to invite you to join us for lunch. Is the lunch ready? Yes? Will you please check?
Yeah, will you go like...
Before we do
make
that,
sure?
I just want to give anybody a chance who would like to ask a question. If you have a question about anything that you heard, or if there's something you would like to comment on, I want to give you a chance to do that before we wrap up. Any reactions that you have to anything you heard, any feedback? Be brave and courageous and yell it out.
We've got a... Yes, please.
I'm just curious, what would happen to that little boy if he would hit back again? I mean, every time he went to the fight, and he get billion instead of to be a winner.
Right. So what would happen to the little boy if he went there and every time he went to stand up for himself, he got knocked down?
Exactly. He come back and he feels so bad about himself. And the father say, okay, go to the other kid. And the same thing happened.
Right. So if every time he went out there, instead of winning the fight, he lost the fight, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's a really great question,
That's a great
because
question.
he didn't go out there to
could've-
win the fight. He went out there to win his honor. See, winning and losing the fight wasn't the issue. Not losing his honor was the issue. So for him to not stand up for himself would have been a loss of honor. So I don't know that a kid who's losing every time would necessarily want to go out there every time. But I think the first time he goes out there and stands up for himself, he will have fought the fight of honor. Now, if any kid is put in a situation where they have to do that every day, I can imagine that at some point it will turn on them. In other words, if you had to do that every single day, go and be in a physical fight with people, that would be very much like living in East LA, or being in a war zone, or being in a place where there's daily violence. I personally, whether I'm the parent of that child or not, I would want to remove them from a situation in which there's daily violence. Certainly.
Well, one of the lessons that the boy learned was that it's not the victories that make us who we are. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You know, I tell the men in the workshop, sometimes you're the windshield and sometimes you're the bug. You know?
So sending the message is more important.
Yeah, sometimes you get squashed in life. The real battle was won in the kitchen when the father was putting on the bandages and said, I know what I'd do. The boy had to decide whether he wanted to be like his father and go stand up for himself and maybe take a beating, because he just had one. He was wounded. You know, he had some injuries. And the real battle was won when he walked back onto the baseball field. After that, whatever happened, happened. But he had already won over his own fear and his own weakness and his own sadness and humility and embarrassment and ashamedness. You know, 5 of your best friends gang up on you and beat you up, you can feel ashamed about that for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
You know? By the way, those boys continued to be my best friends after that. You know? They continued. They got it. They understood. They got it. There was just one guy there that was a bad kid, and he liked to, you know,
Gang up.
you know,
Right.
let's all get together and beat up that guy. You know? He was just a bad kid.
Right.
You know?
Any other questions? Any other questions? Comments? Something you learned you would like to share? Great. So, are we ready?
Yeah. Should we declare this
Would you be
complete?
kind enough to give us a roaring applause for, and yourselves as well, for the completion? Yes?